CGIAR-led event, Can Science and Innovation in Agriculture Deliver Equitable, Resilient and a climate-smart future? My name is James Stapleton, and I'm the Global Head of Communications and Public Affairs at the CGIAR's International Pareto Center. And I'll be the moderator for today's event with the diehards who have managed to survive all of the meetings and got to 6:30 and you're still here. So we should have arranged a prize. It's been a long week. I know it's been a long week. Let me introduce the people that I have here at the moment. On my left, I have Ana Maria Loboguerrero, who's the Director for Climate Action and the leader of the CGIAR initiative ClimeBear. I have Nicolene Dehaan, who's the Director for Gender Equality, Youth and Social Inclusion, the impact platform of the CGIAR. And online, we should have Michiko, Katagami, the Principal Natural Resources and Agricultural Specialist at the Asian Development Bank. Have we got Michiko online? Good evening, Michiko.
Here. Hi.
Thank you, and a special prize to you, because for everybody here it's 6:30, but for you it must be nearly into the early hours of the morning.
Please do not remind me. I'm okay.
Well, it's great to have you online. Well, today's event is, we're going to look at how evidence-based innovation ecosystems can build resilience to climate change equitably and to feed the planet. And to do that, we're going to discuss how effectively we can reach smallholders with appropriate technologies and what finance mechanisms are needed to support climate actions and achieve the co-benefits in food systems, but in ways which don't cause climate harm. We all know climate change is threatening the livelihoods and food security of millions of people around the world, particularly smallholders, reducing crop yields, increasing the incidence of animal and crop diseases. For some farmers around the world, there are just 8 harvests to go before 2030. They have 30 harvests, probably 40 harvests in a working lifetime. Changing a crop, changing the variety, changing the technologies that they use is hugely risky, and particularly for people in extremely vulnerable circumstances. But we know that if we don't change where we're going, if we continue as business as usual, it's higher food prices, it's increasing insecurity in terms for livelihoods, particularly in lower and middle income countries. And not only does it have that effect, climate change is also destroying the soils that we have around the world and our biodiversity, 2 things which are underpinning our food systems, the viability of our food systems. And while many of the challenges are common around the world, the solutions are context-specific. Different economic situations, cultural situations, social situations. Science can play a crucial role in helping us adapt to build solutions, but there are no silver bullets. Solutions depend on geographical, economic and social contexts, and we need tailored solutions. But science for climate also needs the right enabling environment. It also needs the right finances, it also needs the right policy environment, it also needs the buy-in and the support from the countries that are most affected by it. So I'm going to, before I hand over to Ana Maria with the first question, I'd like to have a look at... Oh, George! Please. I was going on as if you weren't going to come. Please come. Please, George. Yeah. We absolutely, definitely want you here. So George has had a hectic schedule over the last few days, I'm sure. So I excluded you out when I introduced everybody. But George Wamukoya, the team leader of the African Group of Negotiators, Expert Support, Agnes, and also a lead negotiator on agriculture here. Welcome, George. You're one of the few as well who has made it to the end of today's event. So before I go and open up to questions from our esteemed speakers, what I thought I'd do is to look at, to throw the questions out to the audience, to people on Slido. So, have we got the Slido up? Yep. So if you go online to slido.com, or if you're able to use the QR code, I'd like you to put your answers into what are the roadblocks to building climate-friendly food systems? So give it a few moments for some answers to come in. What I'd like to do today is have the questions coming from you, shaping the agenda from you, so the experts can then come in and provide and have a conversation about some of the ways forward. There are no answers which are exactly correct or not. So maybe I'll start off. Some of the answers are coming in. Commitment is one. Knowledge, finance, resistance to change. So maybe I'll start with you, Anna Maria. When you hear those words, resistance, political will, knowledge, finance, incentives, how does it make you react? What do you think?
So, thank you. Let me start with resistance, because that was the first one that I saw. Now it changed. But I think that it's a good one. So I think that whatever we do, when thinking about the challenge that we are facing, as you frame it, the status quo is not possible. So staying the way that things are happening right now in relation to vulnerable populations, in relation to inequalities, it's not possible. And I think that therefore, before thinking about what are the solutions, what are the technologies that we believe that should be adopted massively, we need to understand what are the causes, what are the root causes for farmers, smallholder farmers, suffering from climate change threats. So, but that implies something that is very challenging, and it's questioning the way that society functions on its very own roots. And that's hard, and that implies resistance from powerful groups. But I think that if we are serious about really being able to develop adaptive capacity, if we want to empower vulnerable populations so that they can have a say on how they can respond to these changes in climate, we really need to understand what it's making them not really being able to address these issues. And inequality and power balances is part of that, and we need to really think how we can make it change, how we can get away from the status quo in that sense.
George, can I ask maybe the same question to you? When you look at what's coming in, lack of reliable information, inequalities, lack of disaggregated data, resistance, incentives, you've spent the week here working with a lot of colleagues trying to come to agreement. Do any of those words explain for you some of the challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, they sound familiar, business as usual. Two, we haven't understood the relationship between between the climate change and what we do on every day. And therefore, we think it is something that is being discussed somewhere out there and doesn't affect us. So that's critical. And from a policy perspective, what I normally say is that there's a disconnect between the policy makers, the science, and the practitioners, and down there at the farm level, because all this need to interact to inform each other in order to make informed decisions. But you find that our farmers don't get the advice, and therefore they are trying the best they can in order to survive, which is merely coping, not adaptation, not resilience. Our policymakers are churning out policies that have no evidence, information, because in many countries, from the experience we've had in doing long-term strategies, many countries don't have historical data for 30 years or so that would help to come up with some way by which you want to address understanding the system and addressing it. But more importantly, scientists still write their things in a very, very difficult language that I normally tell Louis that your SPM is not for policymakers. How many of our policymakers can read that SPM of IPCC? It's still in a very difficult language. So all this, in my view, would require a paradigm shift in the way we do things. And maybe at some stage I will be able to provide some guidance as to how we are thinking to provide that paradigm shift. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And let me bring in Michiko. George spoke a little bit about this disconnect between policy, I presume, of more powerful, larger organizations, governments, and then what's happening on the ground in terms of delivery. What do those thoughts conjure up in your mind from your experience?
When we just said that they invested in a lot of the smallholder agricultures in Asia and a lot of locations, and in interaction and having with this the group of farmers that we always work with, whatever the agenda is, starting from just a simple crop yield improvement, or just ways to earn more by linking them to the market, and then the climate resilient way of doing things on the farm level and then also post-harvest level. First thing they always ask is, okay, so how do I benefit from that? You know, we can't only just make a point of this because the policymaker is coming up with this saying, look, the global warming is the problem, and this is the right thing to do, to change our behavior, not to do this, and rather do that. I think to me, it's sort of an incentive mechanism, or the resistance action plan. Those things, the why around how the farmers just invest their time and resources for the next crop. I think, James, you started saying there's 8 more crop seasons to do in lifetime, that on average that one farmer has got 30 or 40 chances to invest their time and access to resources to try to make their life better, most of them. And then if you don't speak the language of this, okay, sort of what sort of benefit do they get in terms of profits, income, or is this the typical things that we always say, is that does that require more labor because we don't have many more, or does it and I mean, it is going to be safe? Is it going to be any sort of livelihood that's going to, the additional benefit that we're going to get? So I think we have to just boil it down to whatever the study that comes out or recommendation comes out from a global level, cascade it down to the level of all the practitioners and action, the drivers of the change, in the sense that is that they're convinced to do this. It's even just for the convenience of doing things, to come out with the same income output, that sometimes is a really strong sort of the motivator for some of the farmers to change their behavior. So I think we would have to just that's a sort of like that paradigm shift that we have to see, and also that I think we have to play a better role in doing that than from our side, just working with this smallholder agriculture investment. Sophia, thank you.
Thanks, Michiko. And let me pass over to you, Nicolene. And thinking of the words that came in instead of the roadblocks, and then Michiko turned it around and talked about the incentives. Maybe you could sort of pick up on, from the incentive side, maybe the incentives that are missing. What does it mean when we talk about missing incentives and we're talking about gender inclusion, youth, equity?
A lot of things. Very complex. And I think listening to the conversation a little bit here, first I want to say we often end up talking at people, not with people. And I think that's one of the problems we often have, because we sometimes don't understand the people. And I think it is more important to really get an understanding of who the people are we're talking at, and then make sure that we actually talk with them. So for me, that's very important, and that goes back a little bit to what you're talking about with incentives. I mean, what are the incentives of most of these individuals to actually change their behavior? We as a societal, I mean, we were up here at this level, want the whole society to change, but what about these people? Do they really feel like they need to change? I mean, we talk about climate change being important for farmers. Yes, but farmers have always had to deal with climate. It's one of the most, intense relationship we have with nature is agriculture, for instance. And so farmers have always had to deal with it. So for them, yes, it's more extreme. I'm not saying that. But how can we then turn that around to understanding how can we support them with something that probably in a lot of the cases is beyond their doing? So again, that whole issue of the smallholder, the individual smallholder, and then this bigger push that we're pushing. And again, we're pushing urgency. It has to change, whatnot more. Yeah, it does, but we don't have the tools yet in that place. And so I think we do need to start looking much more at short-term solutions. What are some short-term solutions? And also build the long-term solutions, because I think often those get lost in this whole discussion. And if we don't start dissecting those, we're going to constantly be roaming around and turning in circles at some level. And I can talk a little bit more about that later.
Thanks, Nicolene. So maybe just to deviate a bit away from what's causing the problems, and maybe to look for a second, in a lot of conversations, Anna Maria, you've said to me, technologies alone are not the solution. I think I heard you say that quite a few times in different ways. And then you talked about, bundles of solutions. Can you maybe dig into that a little bit and tell us what does that mean in terms of technologies are not the solution? We had a Twitter, sent it out to people. What are their priorities? And number one on the priorities was technologies. What's wrong with that? And then what is your work telling you in that area?
So I don't think that there's nothing wrong with technologies. Is that just the technologies are not enough. That this is the point. And I think that we have many examples looking into the past 40, 50 years where we, as a research organization, have been developing many promising technologies and have spent tons of money and time and brains into developing these technologies. And at the end of the day, they are not making a difference because farmers are not using them. And so obviously we need the technologies, but we cannot stop there if we really want to generate these changes that we would like to see. And therefore, this is this notion of bundles, which is putting things together in a package where you have technology, but at the same time, you understand how this technology interacts with the incentives that Nicolene was talking about. How does this technology interact with social, economical, political, cultural dimensions so that it's really these technologies fit for purpose? So you really understand what are the needs of, and I agree with you, Nicolene, it's not smallholder farmers, it's not the farmers. Farmers are very different. And since they are very different, their needs are different. So once that you understand those needs, and you can come with a technology that is tailored to address those needs, and you have the right policies in place that are providing the right incentives, and you have the capacity development which is empowering users, farmers, whoever in the food systems to use those technologies, then you are close to getting to the impact that you would like to see. So it's this notion of, it's not just the technology, it's understanding and adjusting, tailoring that technology to respond to very context-specific local needs.
So, I mean, so you're digging into demand, right? Technologies in the past that were driven by supply, by people who thought they knew what the answers were. Maybe some of them maybe some of them were picked up, and maybe some of them weren't. George, can I ask you to dig into that a little bit? This concept of prioritizing bottom-up approaches at local levels, understanding demand, taking those technologies that are already out there, but making them appropriate for the realities in which farmers are living. Could you maybe sort of dig into that in terms of your experiences and how that does work and when it works?
Yeah, thanks. Let me look at it from the UNFCCC framework. There's a lot of investment being put in countries to develop what we call technology needs assessment. And they are on the files. And yet countries and partners are continuing to develop projects without even making reference to those technology needs assessment, for example, that have been identified. Through a process of course, we may question the process also, and I think that's where we need to interrogate the process and see to what extent does it go down there, and you can link it to the needs at the local level, because the understanding and the rationale behind the technology needs assessment is that we need to understand what is the need of a farmer or a variety of farmers. And then based on that, therefore, you look at what are those potential technologies. Do they exist or not? If not, or if they exist, and are they appropriate? And then how do we make them be adopted to scale? Because the challenge we have actually is the and this, I must blame the scientists also, because we sometimes exaggerate things in order to appear like we're making a difference, when the reality is that we may be even retrogressing. Yeah. I want to give you a typical example where we were implementing a DFID project in a commercial region, and we wanted to understand the baseline of the number of farmers practicing CA or conservation or climate smart agriculture in Zambia. And over the years, the Norwegian government had been pumping in money there, and we were being told is about 350 to almost 400. And actually, it's those figures that made the African Union, through the Malabo, to have this policy of 25 by 25, because they believed they had those numbers, and when they add Zambia and others, they thought they would make 25 million adopting climate smart agriculture or CA by 2025. And CG was one of the partners, and you came up with very many bundles that you're talking about, and farmers were more, policymakers and farmers were more confused which one they should use. So what I'm saying here is that now when we came in with DFID money, and we wanted to be targeted to link smallholder farmers with aggregators and through contract farming and the rest, we needed a baseline. And we're doubting that baseline. So we requested the FAO. We gave FAO some resources to do baseline assessment. And the numbers were almost less than 100,000, away from the 350 that are being used and touted in documents. And what was interesting was that the conservation agriculture that was being adopted was because of the incentives. And the moment incentives reduced, then the farmers started pulling out. So the question we ask ourselves, if the technology is so good and farmers are looking for profits, why would they drop out? We haven't understood that, but I'm trying to understand why. So what I'm saying is that scientists, we need, particularly now in the climate change space, we need now to align our work with the NDCs and the NAPs and the technology needs assessments and all those, because those are the ones that are now which are going to inform the global stocktake, so that we know whether we are on that trajectory or not. And we cannot wait. We appreciate the IPCC, very important, but you can see that IPCC, some of our countries are starting to doubt, I don't know for what reason. Like Saudi Arabia has even refused that we don't even take note of the IPCC report. So that's a problem. We should ask yourself as scientists, what's the problem? Because if I look at the sixth assessment report, it appears more progressive. It has broken some ceilings where it's trying to look at the future and the approaches, and which I think is important for the countries as they transition themselves to that low emission and climate resilient. Many countries, many people don't understand those systems. At least IPCC has started doing that. And therefore, so you as scientists, we need now to break it down to policymakers and to the people there, so that we can have appropriate incentives, but also appropriate technologies that would push those, because we need to leapfrog. Otherwise, we're going to drown. Thank you.
James, can I do a question to George? Because you said something very interesting, and it's the importance of focusing on NDCs and national adaptation plans and helping through science to implement those. But so a lot, and I'm not saying all countries, but in many countries, these NDCs were formulating from a very top-down approach, no? Where there was a lot of things missing in terms of understanding those things from people on the ground. And therefore, it's hard when you get into how we implement this. Well, many times doesn't make sense.
Yeah, let me respond quickly. Yeah, you need to understand where disease came from. One is that when we were in Warsaw, there was that push that how do we get developing countries also to participate in the emission reduction. And that's why there was this issue that because we want country-driven, let each country pledge what they are able to do. Now, that was a good decision, because then you get everyone on board. And therefore, as we were moving towards 2015 for the Paris Agreement, the COP21, and this, it's sad, is that we had many development partners parachuting consultants if I talk about Africa, in Africa, with very clear instructions that we need to get more ambition, more emissions from Africa. Just to give you an example, we got Ricardo, and I hope will remain here. Consultants were given for Kenya, and Ricardo came up that Kenya must reduce emissions by 70%. When they presented to Kenya government, the Kenya government said, no, this doesn't make sense, and we don't seem to agree with you. Thank you very much. We're going to sit in Naivasha one weekend. We come up with 30% emission reduction. So if you just use Kenya as an example, you can see that based on the analysis by Ricardo, 70%. Based on the policy decision, 30%. How do you implement that? Take example of Namibia. Because of GIZ, the German relationship with Namibia, they pushed Namibia to submit an NDC with 89% emission reduction, which is unrealistic. And now with this updating, they moved to 91%, which means Namibia is supposed to overhaul completely the way they're doing things now. But where are the resources? So what I'm saying is that, one, science, you have a role now, you can play a role. One, because this global assessment, together with the IPCC, sixth assessment report, is now telling us the state of science and the state of ambition. 2025 is very critical. You can now start working with countries and saying, look here now, let's look at your NDC and be informed by the evidence that is available at the national level and from the local level. And I think from 2025, we're going to see a completely different way of, in different NDCs. And that's what I keep on telling colleagues that I work with under CGIAR, that 2025 provides this global stocktake, the IPCC sixth assessment report provides an excellent opportunity to now work with countries and transform the way they are doing the NDCs so that by the next generation, the second generation NDCs to be communicated in 2025 may be completely different, and they may try to give us a reality. Right now, there's no reality because, for example, Kenya has said it's reducing emission by 32% by year 2030. What's the budget? 62 billion. You can question that mathematics. And then they say 13% will be from domestic resources and 87% from international. If we are not getting the international now, what makes you think you're going to get 87% international support? So that means that target of 32 is hollow. It cannot be realized. So those are the things that we need to look at, and the science should be able to help us. Thank you.
So Michiko, that brings us on to the question of finance. We always come back to the question of finance. So, but how can countries stimulate this shift to long-term investment in climate transformation? Private, public, what are the steps that need to be taken, or some of the steps that needed to be taken to accelerate this? And I guess we're probably thinking not just the public finance in this case, we're thinking also of private finance. Michiko.
I'm not the climate scientist, actually, but we're just sort of always looking at the investment opportunity in the new framework, policy framework, tax incentives, and in that IPCC sort of this, the movement, it's sort of like a global sort of like a business sort of market spaces that are in the making. You know, it's just a new class of assets that are considered to be the low carbon economy. So from that perspective, we've witnessing a very, very interesting phenomenon. We've been working in this rural development and also the smallholder agriculture's improvement for decades, but we starting seeing a lot of private fund coming in, looking at the opportunity for the climate smart investment and try to work with that group of farmers, not just for 2 years or 3 years. They just roll up their sleeves and work with us for 10 years, 20 years. Some of the impact fund that comes in to co-finance, co-invest in Mongolia, for example, they laugh at us first and like, oh, you're gonna be here for this project for 10 years only? We were willing to work with the rural communities for 20 years. I'm just saying, it might not be the major flow yet, but what has changed here? Well, you know, because the Paris Agreement and also the NDC's development, and with that, a little bit of some of the countries started working a policy framework to implement. Now, that generates a bit of that commercial value of the sequestration of carbon. And that we started seeing as a very, very important source of financing sources for whatever that we're trying to introduce and change that we want to see happen at smallholders level. There was similar sort of attempt in the past for ecosystems or services fee, that was just simply not good enough just to change the behavior in terms of monetary terms. But it's the things that we're talking about, for example, in for the Mongolian case, is that if they commit to this sustainable rangeland management in Mongolia, the herders groups that we're going to organize with our assistants on our project, as a public institutions, to collaboratively sort of agree on the sustainable use of seasonal use of rangeland management, also the cover crops and all this, what is believed to be the climate smart and the sequestration sort of practices. And then if you do that, they clearly see the substantial cash flow coming in, additional cash flow. So we just looking at this opportunity, and they're all excited. The herders groups, women's group that was subgroups that would benefit out of this cash flow, NGOs that we work with, and co-investors, impact investors that were coming. And also, we are genuinely surprised to see all these private people, because a few years ago, even if we seek out all these private partners, it's for the sake of this funding more of this upscaling of this ground level work that we want to roll out together with these farmers, because there's a dire needs to improve their livelihood. It was extremely difficult when we try to talk to some of the private farms. When I mentioned that the country name, they walk away thinking that country risk is so much. So it's, I think, the global system in the making for the low carbon system. Carbon pricing, carbon taxing that is introduced in Singapore, for example, immediately just genuinely generating incentive to support the low carbon sort of development in the developing countries. And then that's the commercial incentive enabler, the policies and the frameworks, and also these ground level forces. So there's a lot of elements into this, but we're just simply excited about this because we've never seen this level of this fund coming in to support the climate investment in developing countries. And I just wanted to throw in just a little bit positive things because it's hard target and a lot of things that has to happen out of this very limited resources. But together with this flow of the change of the fund coming in to the developing countries, that comes with the requirement for the really top-notch research to come out. By the way, for the effort of this Mongolia, starting from the scratch of this consultation of the multi-levels, and also the identifying of what granular actions that has been taken by the herders groups, and a negotiation, initial negotiation of the private funds, all done by the efforts of this CG centers, the scientists, and then its extended network. So I'm really hopeful for about this, doing a lot more of this and mobilizing a lot more funding, because we see the potential to do so. I'll just stop here, I think.
Thanks a lot, Michiko. Let me go to Nicolene for a moment. Nicolene, you were discussing a piece of research that's coming out quite soon, which is talking about the effects, because we're talking about, there's a very positive note, talking about increases interest on the private sector, flowing into agriculture, creating opportunities. But that's not everywhere, and it's not for everyone. If you could maybe talk a little bit about what the research is telling you, and then maybe some of the steps. What are the next steps to sort of overcoming some of that?
Okay, so some of the research that we're trying to do, partly because I work on gender, so I'm more of a gender person than a climate change gender in agriculture, is one of the things that frustrates us is when we're talking about gender, we often talk about women as a big group. Women are just a homogeneous group, and all women are vulnerable, and all women are, disempowered. That irritates us, and so what we're really trying to do is having more of a nuanced conversation about women, because you will see often, I find interesting, you will see farmer pastoralists and women. It's like, isn't this men and women, pastoralists, farmers, whatnot more? So it's partly language, but part of what we're also trying to do is to make sure that my big problem often with climate change and gender is women are, affected worse. We're asking the wrong question if that's the answer we constantly get. So from our part as researchers, we're really trying to turn some of that conversation around and not only talk about, women are affected, are impacted by climate change. Yeah, they are. I'm not saying that at all, but we need to move beyond. So one of the things we've been able to work with, and George has also picked up on this, which is great to see, they're also working on it in a different project, is we're looking at hotspots. So hotspots where climate change is worse, and we've layered that on top of gender inequities. Where are gender inequities? And then people involved in agriculture. So we have the three layers looking at each other, and through that we've been able to identify globally at least the ranking of countries where it's bad, where it's the worst. And then on top of that, in that country, we will also look in the regions if the data is available, because data, and especially gender disaggregated data, is very difficult to get by. I mean, so what we then want to do within these hotspots is try to turn that inequity around before it gets even worse. So what we're doing, especially in two countries, in Bangladesh and in Zambia, is actually looking at what are some of the opportunities and doing some research to really show this does work or this doesn't work. Because I think, again, as Anna Maria was also saying, we've tried a lot of different things and we've gotten farmers to try a lot of different things, not always successful. So let's be much more targeted. And it goes back to the finance. We don't have money to solve everybody's problems. So let's at least really start targeting much better where we actually intervene and where we try to reduce these gender inequities as they're growing, as we know because of climate change, they are growing. And so can we stop them there? So I think that's quite important. I did want to take, now that I've got the floor, I did want to take a few seconds to also talk about technologies and bundles and whatnot more, because the other thing we've realized when you're looking at gender research is that, I always use this as an example. You can give a woman a pump, but does that empower her? And the language often is, well, give him a chicken and it'll empower her. That's a big jump, And so for me, it's often to think, okay, so you are going to give a woman a pump. Okay, fine. But then it goes back to the bundle. What do you need around that to make sure that it works for a woman? Mm-hmm. And part of that is just a simple, sometimes education. What do you actually use for? How do you fix it? What are the rules and the regulations around? What is the policy about actually accessing water? How do you access fuel to get that pump running? But on top of that, what do you want to do with it? I mean, just giving a woman a pump doesn't mean that she has huge aspirations to grow vegetables and sell them. No, she's busy at home with her kids. That's her priority right now. But maybe she's widowed and she does need it. So again, what I'm really asking as well as we move forward is much more nuance in some of these discussions. And unfortunately, that still does require research. And it requires a huge investment in getting some of that data. Because like climate change, we've been fighting for gender disaggregated data, and it's still not out there. I mean, even till today, it's still not out there. And it's as simple, and I'm looking at my CGIAR colleagues here as well, it's as simple when you do a project and you want a baseline, you need to double your budget. Because, sorry, all of a sudden you're going to have to ask 2 people in a household. Not just one, not just the head of household, but you need to ask 2 people. And it is as simple as that. But people just, again, are often don't have the funding or aren't that incentivized to do it. But if we're taking it serious, as with climate change, we do need to understand the baseline and we do need that data. So, and it frustrates me because I'll probably be sitting here 10 years from now still saying this, so hopefully we won't. But yes, so those are a few thoughts from my side.
Thanks, Nicolene. Actually, you know what? Speaking of listening to what you're talking about, prioritization, laser sharp, I thought we'd move over to another Slido. Let's become laser sharp. What do you want to focus on for the last 40 minutes of this conversation? So if the Slido goes up, you can go to slido.org, or if you're sophisticated enough, you can put your phone in, it will get the QR code working. And you're going to get a choice between finance, gender, technologies, and policies. And then let's maybe dig into 1 or 2 of those, and then throw out to you to get some of the questions in if we're really not going we're still not going in the direction that you'd like us to go in. Okay, well, I thought finance was going to come in first. George is It didn't work. We tried to. So, okay, you're looking at that. Let me start off with Anna Maria. That was the order which I've been going in. Anna Maria, policies. 73% people are saying it's policies. So when you think about that policies, can you also maybe dig into a real life example of one of those bundles that you can see that's ready or nearly ready? I know that some of them are a little bit more mature than others.
So it's thinking, for instance, about insurance. Thank you. I always forget this. So think about insurance as a component of being able to manage risks, climate risks, insurance in the agricultural sector. So insurance has been something that has been unsuccessful to get to the hands of the farmers that need it the most. And we have been trying for years and years in terms of our understanding how do we make sure that insurance is helping these types of very vulnerable populations. And there are many, they have been studies and papers documenting why this has happened. In many cases, it's because the type of insurance, it's not fit for purpose. Again, we don't understand the circumstances where these people, these potential users of insurance live, and since we don't understand those circumstances, we are developing these products that do not make sense in those specific circumstances. But the other big conclusion from the literature, it's also the need to subsidize insurance from the government. And that's another thing that has happened, and we have been learning about that. So that's one of the things, for instance, where your bundle comes into thinking about insurance. What's the right product that can really help farmers that we want to work with? But then, what's the role of policy in terms of using that insurance? So without the policy, it's not going to happen. We're not going to get the results that we would like to see happen. So that's where policies become super relevant in terms of really being able to use these tools. But then going a little bit more into formulation of policies, because I think that that's another area where I believe that science can contribute. And the thing with formulating policy for climate change is that there's a lot of uncertainty. It's uncertainty in relation to climate, but many times we're thinking about long-term processes, and it's uncertainty about prices, about socioeconomic variables in general, and it's hard to do policy under each circumstances. And this is where the scenarios are a really interesting tool in terms of imagining those futures. And we have been working with the scenarios. But again, the same thing, just imposing some scenarios on policymakers it's not going to make it work. So what we are trying to do now each time more is to co-generate those scenarios with the policymakers, with a variety of stakeholders in the rooms. And something really interesting, so we have our economic models that we love, and I am an economist by training, and we love our economic models, and we believe that they are going to solve the world. But when you get into a room, and the variables that you need for your models, the inputs, you get it from the people there, from the people that really understand better than we do, because we as scientists, we are not the ones that are going into the field every single day and seeing what's happening with our crops. We say that we do, but we don't, because we are not there all the time. So, but when you get into spaces of dialogue where you can use some tools that help us to somehow understand how to manage some situations, but you combine that with the knowledge of the people that are facing these risks and the policymakers that are involved into interactions with farmers, different type of farmers, into making something that could work for them, and you combine those things, then it's perhaps when the magic starts coming. And the bundles is the same thing. It's using scenarios, but co-generating the information for those scenarios, bringing the vision of policymakers into constructing those scenarios, because otherwise it's just like giving some scenarios that, as George was saying, and we tend to use a language that nobody understands, and we hope that we just bring the policy brief with the economic model and then that it's going to be used, and it's never going to happen. So this is more a co-generation of knowledge using tools that are relevant, but that can help us to really think all of us together on what's the best way to address this or to make good policies under the uncertainty.
Thanks, Anna Maria. You know, that makes me think a little bit. Somebody once said to me that innovation was doing what your clients wanted you to do. I always push back against the word client. But if you really are trying to respond to demand and you're coming out with solutions, working with people, when you know where you want to go, that's when you can innovate and provide choices. George, what does it strikes you? Finance came back a little bit. No, it didn't. It's right then. It's right then. I mean, you've spent a week talking about means of implementation. It's interesting. How does that sort of strike you when you look at it? When you see policies at the top? I mean, maybe it's the same.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm one of the people who believe that there's plenty of money out there. It's only that we have not been able to harness it and channel it in the right place. And therefore, first, the enabling environment through the policies becomes very important to unlock all that resources that is out there. Why do I say this? GCF, for example, has set aside some money for countries for readiness, for countries to be ready to be able to prepare proposals. Some countries have not even attempted, or if they have attempted, they have never gotten the money. So we still have money lying there where many of our countries, for example in Africa, should access, but they are not accessing because of capacity problem. I was involved in a program with NEPAD, AUD and NEPAD, where we were assessing the level of capacities for countries to develop bankable proposals. And we had those co-generations where we brought teams to work on those projects. And it was astonishing. There's a lot of lack of capacity. We have good technical people, there's no doubt about that. They're very good experts. But the orientation to prepare bankable proposals, they don't have. And that's the challenge that, I don't know, I must throw to the scientists like the CGIAR, because CGIAR, you are privileged in the sense that you can access many of these experts on how to do bankable proposals. So as part of your bigger research where you want to provide knowledge and the rest, but you want to make a difference. In my view, you should also invest in building capacity, working with those countries that are not able to access this money. Let them access, and you'll also find room for you because you may actually get additional resources for the research which we are all crying our countries are not investing in research. So what I'm simply saying is that innovation is not only on the part of scientists trying to come up with technologies, innovations and rest, but it's also looking at the situation and saying, look here, how can we turn around this? The other, and I'm sorry to use this on Maria and Leo and Vashon. Why should we have, when you're dealing with climate change, why should we be having projects for 3 years or 2 years? It's not for, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And therefore we need to turn around our partners and tell them, look here, if you want us to make a difference with the countries, or the minimum now has been set, it's 5 years. Because the NDCs is 5 years, and therefore you want to see how that NDC is evolving. and help that country to move to the next level when they are preparing the next NDC. And so I would urge that scientists also, you turn around your program time from 2 year, this 2 year thing of 3 years doesn't help. We need to move to 5 year and beyond. And then the other one, which I think is important, and it ties also with the policy, is we're trying to look at very many varieties of resource mobilization. Like, for example, there's the green bonds and all these things. Nobody has looked at them from a holistic perspective as to what is the potential and how many countries, for example, in Africa can be able to use those tools. For example, when Malawi imposes a carbon tax, is that the right instrument, or there could have been another instrument? South Africa, yes, because the volume of things is big. Kenya will be big. Nigeria will be big. But Comoros, would that be the right instrument? So what I'm challenging is that you have said policy is important, but you need to test some of the ideas of those policies so that we are able to see the impact they will create, particularly if we are looking at 1.5 degree and how countries unlock additional resources because their budgets will not work. GCF, I'm sorry, is not going to provide the resources that are required. It's definitely private sector. Is that private sector there? Are they in the same page? I've always challenged, but I haven't talked to you, Louis. I've challenged colleagues that everyone seems to be talking about Article 6 as though it's going to be the panacea of all the problems, because have you guys, particularly in the agriculture sector, for example, looked at what are the opportunities for Article 6? Because it appears it's everyone is talking about it. And even Kenya, we said we are going to use Article 6, but we don't know how. We are still dreaming. Yeah. So I think what I'm simply saying is that there are some instruments that are emerging at international level. For example, the Article 6 and all those. I know some of your institutions are CTCN accredited, and therefore you can provide support. Right now, CTCN now has a link with the GCF, and they can mobilize resources. So you can actually partner with CTCN to write proposals to support countries in scaling up those technologies that you're talking about, so that are going to make a difference. Let's make a difference. We seem to be still in the traditional way. And I think if we can move, transition, and see, is good. But please, scientists, take keen interest in this process of GST, Global Stocktake, that is happening. It's going to identify the gaps. And because once it identifies the gap, then you come in, plug in, and say, look here, you want the 1.5? This must be addressed, and therefore resources must be mobilized. And I think that would be good. And then, based on that, please work with some countries as pilots in 2025 to develop good, well-grounded NDCs. And, Madam, no country, there are very few countries that have domesticated the Lima work program on gender and the gender action plan. It's coming to an end with nothing. Let's try. Kenya, in law, requires to do that. Take that as an example. Uganda is ready to take off because they are currently implementing some gender project, but they just need some push, and you get a policy instrument. So what I'm saying is that given the international policy that has been created as a result of the Paris Agreement and other instruments, we need to, countries are trying and struggling to domesticate those policy. and therefore have national policies that will help them to live within the goals of Paris Agreement. And the work that you're doing on the ground, because I know CG and many of you are, you're doing good work on the ground. How does that feed into the national policy so that you say this, and by the way, African countries now have said they're tired of pilots. There are too many pilots and they remain at pilots. So how do we bring them to scale? Get something and bring it to scale, and I think you can now use that. Currently, we have very few case studies, leave alone what you publish as CGIAR, as best stories or whatever. No. When we are looking at the UNFCCC, when there was a call for countries to submit their what they consider best practices, you'll be amazed that very few countries could have stories to say. So what does that mean? It means nothing is happening? I'm not sure. There's a lot of things happening, but we don't seem to be getting them into the pipeline to influence to have the greater influence. And then based on that, and because you work at a continental level or regional level, we can actually get decisions at, for example, the African Union, at the commercial level, at the East African Community, at ECOWAS. And those policy decisions are also very good because they catalyze action. Yeah. For example, because of Malabo, you remember ECOWAS came up with the Climate Smart Agriculture Program. And therefore, you've been working with them and you're moving. Out of the Marrakesh, we came up with a AAA. You've been working with Morocco to get how to move. So, yes, there are those things that catalyze movement. But I think as scientists and experts, and particularly CG, you need to relook at the way you're structured and say, how can we make a difference in this opportunity landscape that now is emerging that will benefit from the science that you have? Thank you.
Thank you, George. A lot of lessons to us, and I think a lot of how to work better with policymakers. Let me go over to Michiko for a moment, and thinking about what George is talking about, and maybe some of the other speakers as well. Policies being the most important. There was maybe a bit of a surprise. It was different than what we'd heard when we put it out on social media. Not that that's necessarily a representative group.
It's very scientific.
But you guys are the science side, right? I'm what walks and talks. So how does that resonate with you in the Asian Development Bank? Policies being the most important, and specifically what Anna Maria was talking about with co-creating policies that make sense. George was talking about, the language that makes sense to people. I think how does that resonate for the Asian Development Bank, and then maybe over then to Nicoline as well to get a response on why gender, maybe what's behind that. Thanks.
First of all, how many of this is a sample size? Is it 5 people or 100 people? But anyhow, I mean,
5 now very, very, very keenly connected individuals.
Okay. So, but policies, I mean, okay, so now, while my memory is fresh, and George was talking about this Article 6, this is an exciting area, and we see this is very, very important area. It's the governments that we work with. This is very exciting. Also, private sectors are very excited. Some of the farmers groups that might be able to benefit out of this very excited, but they bring clarity on the whole making, on the rate making, so that actual action by the farmers that either removes or sequesters carbon can be financially compensated. And that's sort of like a mechanism that we're just sort of like bridging that mechanism to be in making. This is the first time that by the action of the climate smart behavior of the farmers, not just because it's linking to this certification, value chains or whatever, but it's just the action itself is directly compensated. This is really exciting area, and it's a policy clarity has to be in place. Otherwise, a lot of interest in private investors cannot come in I mean, this is a new area, and we have to be very careful maybe, and we need to do a lot more study in a country-specific context. But this is one key area that we're looking at. And it's just the traditional things, for example, like subsidies that goes to the water, energy, and agriculture, that is stopped in the way of what this adaptation is trying to do, or just incentives to increase the energy efficiency in food value chains. It doesn't work even if the technology enable the farmers to save water and energy. There's no incentive if it's just like a flat sort of irrigation fees imposed, or there's subsidies everywhere, so the price actually in the eye of the farmers or the practitioners in the agriculture value chains that is very low. So there's a very important area, and I would even throw in it's just that increasingly the land issue will come out, and the clarity would have to be coming for this actual benefiting equally benefiting of all large number of farmers is accessing all these beneficial things that's come out of this development. Just one throw question though is I've been a bit puzzled about what you mean by technologies here. Listening to all the speakers, variety of situations and heterogeneous just different sort of demands, the needs, and the potential that a lot of farmers are exposed to, and you have to come up with the tailored, solutions, not just for the one sort of like a standard. And that sounds like very expensive things. And when you think about scaling, though, we usually start for, let's say, the per project about 50,000 households, 100,000 households, but we want to scale it to the millions, 500,000, and then next it's going to be the million, 2 million, so forth, within the 10 years time engagement per project. CGIAR is that aiming to address the 500 million needs. When you try to scale an actual sort of rulemaking, that has to be in place, and it's not really that relevant if you're dealing with hundreds of farmers, maybe. So in that context, I think policy is very important. I agree with that, even if it's a 5 key people is supporting only, but I think it is very important too. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Michiko. And just to dig into that a little bit, policies and policies being, and then going back to what George said was, there's not a shortage of money. It's about plugging it in. And Nicolene, you spoke a second about doubling budgets. Is there a connection between the policies then and what enabling environment for gender? It's not about finance. It's about something maybe a little bit more deeper.
Yes, it is about something deeper. I mean, for me, the question at some level is a little bit wrong. Because I don't think it's one thing that's going to answer it either, to be honest. It's a combination. And I think bottom line is, if we're supposed to believe the climate scientists, and I'm not questioning that, I'm just putting in but it's urgent, right? So we need all hands on board. Yeah. And let's get women involved. Why not? I mean, to be totally honest, women have not been at the table from the beginning. We're trying to improve that, but get their voices in. And again, women have solutions as well. Bring them in as part, because we need all hands on board right now. We can't wait. So whether it is finance, whether it's policy, whether it's technology, we need everybody involved in that. It's not just a few people or a few people who decide, it's everyone. And I really think that's quite important as we move forward, because to be totally honest, we've been struggling with this for years. So let's open our ears to new voices as well and figure out how they can help figure some of these problems out. I really do think that's important. I think policies are incredibly important, but policies are, like a lot of things, only as useful as people who can use them. And if people can't use the policy because the language is wrong, because they're not informed about it, then it makes no sense. I mean, having said that, I've also learned that most policies are quote-unquote gender blind. And let me use a very simple, straightforward example. I worked a lot on livestock, and we've been involved with developing livestock master plans for countries. Easy, simple, straightforward, figure out where the livestock sector is going, and then we'll figure out. So I put up my hand and say, can we do the gender in that? Can we make sure, because women are involved in livestock. We all know that. I mean, especially with poultry, et cetera, and whatnot more. First thing I hit is that most of these livestock master plans are based on a herd model. Now, a herd model is basically looking at the whole country, how many livestock. There's not a human involved in this herd model. How do you put gender in a model that's not, has no humans involved, whether male or female? What I'm trying to say there is that I think there's a lot more thinking we need to do on how these systems and how these policies get developed and how we make sure they're not gender blind, and especially making even more sure that they don't work against what women want and what women need, and actually create an enabling environment to not only give voice, but give solutions. It's not only voice. We don't want them sitting there chuntering away like women do. We want them to be part of the solution as well. So I think those are, like I say, so for me this question is a little bit wrong. I think bottom line is if we don't do SDG 5, we can't do any of the SDGs because we don't have everybody on board. And if we don't have everybody on board, what are we really doing? I mean, so that's my sort of moment on my soapbox.
Well, all of you have touched on this question of voice. So at this point, maybe later than we would have liked, let's give some voice to the audience. If there are any questions that we haven't touched on that you'd like one or all of our speakers maybe to dig into. Yep. Hey, voice from the furthest voice away.
Hello, everyone. Today was super interesting. It was my first interaction with such an era of perspective toward how the policies on a very high level are made. And now, by the end of the day, I'm hearing that it's not connected with the reality. And I'm doing my master's in biosystems engineering at Wageningen University and research. And there we are like just doing or looking into literature, such as it's gonna happen, it's gonna really happen. But like we are still totally detached, and it's always about the economics. So if we are assessing the cost of destructing the ecosystem services, and if we are looking like 50 years from now, and what will be the cost of that, so why not to bring the money now for the people and create the subsidies and support the insurance? So this could be like a tool to keep on doing the business as usual with the support from the insurance, and then make the money there and then push the people to move forward. So why not to use the insurance as a tool of moving forward with the plan and then support the climate mitigation and all of that? So why not to make the insurance there on board in an effective or more effective way? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions before I go to panelists? I'll give you a moment to think about it. And does anybody want to come in on that gentleman's comment?
Let me start, and then Maria can. Yeah, no, I think we must admit that countries are overwhelmed with the international policy, what's coming from. You just imagine the work that is being done under climate change. Similar work is being done under biodiversity. Similar work is being done under desertification, and it's the same government, and they are overwhelmed. There has been attempts, there was a push as to whether we could have one reporting mechanism for the 3 Rio conventions, but that has been blocked because, of course, they all have different secretariats, and no secretariat wants to be collapsed. So one way we need to look at is we need to reform the international architecture. And I think that's part of the discussions we're having here, in the sense that now that we're moving, for example, in from the negotiations, which we've been doing for many years, into implementation, should we be meeting every year? Does that make sense? I know as a negotiator, I know my colleagues want to meet every year. But the reality is, it makes sense now to move to either 2 years or 3 year cycle, so that at least you do something, and then you come and report. But that is now at a political level. Now, why the disconnect is that we're still making a lot of decisions from top going down, but the wheel at the national level does not move as fast. You know, every year we're churning out decisions. We don't make policy, we don't improve policies, we don't change policies every year. So you'll find that some of the decisions, some of the important things that we generate here cannot find space at the national level, because the way we are structured, it takes time to do a policy, and to review a policy, it takes several, and it requires resources. So you'll find the policies that move faster are those that are supported by external, which then brings in the point is it really country-owned or is being driven from outside? So that is the disconnect, in the sense that we're churning a lot from the top down, but also we don't, now the NDC is what is trying to create a momentum of starting from the bottom and having some level of meeting. But the NDCs have been designed in a manner that is still top-down and driven from outside. That's the challenge. And then finally, if you're looking at, and this I must say it's unfortunate, if you're looking at the Paris Agreement, the NDC is largely a mitigation tool. Adaptation is voluntary. Let's face it. And that's why it becomes difficult. That's why the global stocktake we're now having here, the question we're having is, we are supposed to assess mitigation part, but we're not able to assess the adaptation part, because adaptation is voluntary. So why should we spend money and train people to do assess a voluntary thing? Because the way we designed the Paris Agreement is mitigation-centric. Although G77 pushed in that NDC should have both mitigation and adaptation, that was just theatrics. The reality is NDC is mitigation. So you can see that the way we have the structure makes it very difficult for countries to respond and domesticate the international instrument. But also, we don't see, when countries are developing the NDCs and all those, they don't get the best science available and what is happening on the ground. A baseline, many countries don't have baseline. So those NDCs, I've told colleagues, Kenya, which is best placed, and my sister is here, Ilri. Why is Kenya using the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory of 2015 in a document for 2021 or 2022? It doesn't make sense, because the requirement is 2 years maximum. So we just sorry. I hope I'm not making your life difficult, but I want to hand over to
No, thank you, George. Does anybody else wants to come in on George's question, or are there any other questions from the audience? Yep. Maybe let's take. I'm looking at the time. It's getting late. So let's take one more question, and then maybe a quick wrap up, and then a big thank you to everybody who's survived until 8 in the evening. It's a long day. It's a long day.
Thanks. Grazia Jakinali, Crop Life International, and I'm following the Coronavia process for Bingo. I think just building on what you were just saying, you mentioned earlier that Article 6 is a great potential, but that link hasn't been made. And is that why? Is that what's missing? And if what you were just talking about, sort of the delay in taking the policies to the ground and then actually having someone ready to implement it? And then if that's the case, how can industry support to help to get there with Article 6, especially because there are many farmers already in the world that are doing this, that are sequestering carbon, and they're not waiting for the policies to catch up?
Yeah, from the negotiations point of view, we get mixed signals from the scientists like Louis. He's in front of me, so I can use him as a specimen. The problem is this. The moment we say we want agriculture to be included, then they start telling us, oh, permanency, I don't know what, volatility, and the rest. And we say, okay, yeah, so impossible. And yet, in another forum, you hear somebody saying, no, soil organic carbon is important. But it's the same. It's the same medium that you're talking about. So we have not received one strong messaging. And the beauty is that we haven't defined which sectors at this stage. So there's an opportunity actually for you, a particular CGIAR, to help us to make sure that where agriculture can benefit from this will be important, because we believe, especially even 6.2, even if we don't go 6.4, which is a CDM type, 6.2 is international cooperation, where countries cooperate on that, and I think Switzerland and others are already doing that. And so my recommendation will be that CGIAR takes this seriously and work with the negotiators to see how best can we position agriculture in these emerging opportunities, and then from there we will be able to benefit. Because recently we had a meeting with our minister in Kenya, and he told us he wants us to do something on soil carbon. And then I said, now, and he told me, George, go and work on something. I haven't gone back to him because I don't know what to tell him.
Thanks, George. If does anybody else want to come in, or should I wrap up? Well, you know,
Can I just add?
Yep,
can I just add
Michiko.
a few comments from Asia.
Yep.
When it comes to Article 6, this is in Asia, it's really, really exciting. Many of the countries are working on this presidential decrees and regulatories for the transparency, because a lot of private investors and also potential beneficiaries are asking all those questions. Okay, what are you going to do about this? And then some of the countries already made a certain decision. Some of them are still considering, but it's really, they look at the source of important financing for this, the climate investment. And also in the Asian country, as far as I know, NDC doesn't, it's about mitigation, but also it does include a chunk of the adaptation there as well. And then just to add some of the different perspective from the development banks, ADB and also all the MDBs, multilateral development banks, is going to align with the Paris Agreement. What that is all of our investment, regardless of the sector, is going to be Paris aligned. What that means is that we pick up all the adaptation opportunity, all the mitigation opportunity, and then consider all this local strategy and plan, and we would have to be in line with those. So that's going to be completely by next year. We have 12 months to go. We're doing a lot of reforms on this. We're doing a lot of internal research on this. And I think they were hiring a lot of experts to help us out in the transformational things. So at least in our world, there's a lot of interesting, exciting things happening, potential investment being discussed, and there's a lot of ideas for the research that we would like to support. So I just end with a little bit of positive note, and a little bit of the insurance. We don't really want to work on insurance in isolation. That's the only fundamental thing. We want to work on this risk mitigation, investment plus insurance, because insurance always remains pilot in our area of work, and that's not really exciting. But we have to think about the risk mitigation as the insurance as a part of the plan, not just the whole investment that we are looking at. So with that comment, back to you, James.
Well, first I'd like to say thank everybody for being here today, and particularly Michiko, because it's very late where you are. I'd just like to make a couple of takeaways. What I'm hearing is there's a lot of opportunity down the road, particularly with Article 6. It's been maybe explored more. We need a lot more certainty, and that is where I think our policy framework comes in. If we want private investment, there needs to be a level of certainty. Maybe there needs to be an investment structure that's able to support that. But there's also a role in from a CGIAR, but also the international architecture itself is what George is saying. We need to align the architecture to meet the demand. And I think that's an interesting, if we begin to meeting the demand, then maybe we can capture a lot of the positive hope that Michiko is expressing. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much and have a nice evening and weekend.
Nice weekend. Bye.